I left the city, I've been browsing, treading water that they drowning. My head on a swivel, yeah. It's only real in my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 126 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at Dynasty_DadFF. And joining me again is Rookie Fever John. John, this class has me so excited. We got to do another podcast, right? We got to get in here. And I think the biggest struggle right now is trying to give you guys how to make it applicable. And today, you guys have been asking about the running backs. You've been asking about, how to break things down. When we have an awesome, future guest, Garrett Price, came out and he did a landing spot, not where he wants everybody to go, but where he mocked everybody to go out of those core fantasy positions, right? We know Daniel Jeremiah and, everyone else is out there putting their mocks. We don't want to hear about offensive linemen. We don't want to hear about D linemen. This is fantasy, baby. We want to hear about them running backs, those quarterbacks. And he has a nice list here, and I'm excited to break that down here for you. And then once we go over them, I want to hear your biggest take of like who's where they should be, who do you think falls. And as we go through the process, like this is an exercise, okay? Just for everybody that's going out there, like I put my rankings between the 2022 and 2023 class based off this mock. So this is just something fluid, so you guys can start to see what are the good landing spots. Where do I want my rookie running backs to go? And if they do, where are they going to be? So his first guy he has in there, 110, Bijan Robinson to the Eagles. Now this is a little bit earlier than a lot of mock drafts have him, but John, Bijan Robinson to the Eagles is like, can Bijan Robinson hype get any higher? The answer is no, but if he goes to the Eagles, I mean, it is verified. This is kind of a race car. This is putting a Ferrari into an offense that's already ready for it. Like I saw a lot of people on there were like, well, player X, Y, and Z is going to eat into that. We just saw Miles Sanders ball out. We saw Miles Sanders as an RB1. You insert Bijan Robinson into that situation, and man, that just further verifies that's our RB1 overall.
Yeah, this is like putting nitros into the Ferrari at that point. It's really two things, right? If he gets that kind of draft capital, like top 10 overall, and he goes to the Eagles, it is just wheels up situation. It already kind of is, but it's already getting so pricey, like we've talked about. This would actually be a scenario where his value would go up. Now, I have heard some people say, no, well, that's not so great in Philly. Jalen Hurts is going to take a lot of touchdowns away. I'm like, I'm not so sure, right?
That's just a narrative. I mean, we just saw Miles Sanders.
Yeah, he had 11 rushing touchdowns.
Exactly. The problem in the past was the fact that Miles Sanders wasn't getting that full usage until it came into that contract year. They're going to, use Bijan right off the bat. And yeah, it will take away a couple of touchdowns. But I think this is just one of those dream landing spots.
Yeah,
with Bijan Robinson, people keep asking, is there a landing spot where he wouldn't be the 101? And the answer is no. You know what I mean?
No.
We even got to a point where a guy messaged me and he said, what is the scenario where Bijan Robinson isn't the 101? I said, there isn't one. He goes, what if he tears his ACL in a grocery store parking lot? And I was like, okay, maybe if we get that going,
Don't put that out there, though.
We'll debate that for the one versus two. But I mean, Bijan Robinson is that 101. We've been talking about it every single podcast. And, there's not a lot to really unfold there. It's just
it is what
further.
It is.
If he's going to get round one draft capital, we already know that. It's just how high. If it's 10, man, that means the Eagles really are super committed to continuing.
And a luxury pick there. Yeah, they're going to try to get back to the Super Bowl, right, with that pick.
Exactly. And then they have another one in the 20s, which is even before our next guy off the bat. So we might even be able to take him. In this particular mock draft, Jahmyr Gibbs goes to the Kansas City Chiefs at pick 31.
Yeah.
Another one that's just the biggest thing I've taken away from this, and I've tried to tell everybody, we talk about that volatile running back landscape. It sounds like Josh Jacobs is going to go back to the Raiders on a franchise tag. Sounds like Pollard's going to be there on a franchise tag. Sounds like Saquon's going back. And there's a lot of, open areas. What I'm trying to do is, if you have Isaiah Pacheco, right? If you have Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we were just talking about in the group chat about packaging to give Edwards-Helaire a third for a second at this point. If you can get any second for Pacheco, especially if they have a good Super Bowl. We're recording before the Super Bowl. But these are times to move on these guys, because KC adding Jahmyr Gibbs is what we wanted Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be, right? Like, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was the RB6, maybe 5 in that class. Gibbs is my RB2. You put that RB2 with the best PPR chops in this class, in my opinion. To the Chiefs, man, this, especially in a team that doesn't have wide receivers, a team that's just, Kelsey's getting a little bit older. Jahmyr Gibbs gets a little bit closer to Bijan Robinson here if he goes to KC in people's minds.
Yeah, I think we've been having this tier break after the top 3, which we consistently have been Bijan, Young, and Stroud so far. And we talked about maybe JSN at 4. In my even as of today, I've been kind of playing around with putting Gibbs back into the 4 spot.
That's crazy.
It's
I have too.
Thing. Yeah.
And in this particular one, let's take, because this is what's going to be the defender. Those guys are in that same tier. Garrett Price has JSN going at 14 to the Patriots. So he becomes that wide receiver 1 for the Patriots, and you got Gibbs here to KC. Does that differentiate for you yet?
It does. Like in this case, exactly like you just said, I would move Gibbs into the 4 spot here, because getting late round 1 draft capital for a running back, first of all, is huge, and it puts him on a 5-year rookie contract. And I just don't love the landing spot for JSN going to the Patriots, right? Because they're not a real pass-heavy team. Now, it's interesting. Like, we saw the slot-type receivers clean up in New England for all those years. You think about the Edelmans, right, that just got peppered, but they also had Tom Brady.
Correct.
That was back when McDaniel was there. So, I just don't love it quite as much in the current offense that we're seeing now. Maybe it gets better, new OC and Patriots. But for me, coming back to Gibbs, like, we're here to talk about Gibbs here with round 1 draft capital going to the Chiefs. I would put him at 4 overall and consider actually putting him into that top tier. I think the 104 would be more valuable. Now, here's what I think we're going to hear from the Dynasty community, which, again, is very savvy. What is going to be different this time than CEH? Why would this work for Gibbs and not CEH? Well,
yeah.
I'm going to throw a couple things out there.
I've had that nonstop. That's the question after I posted this. And my thing was, what I just prefaced with was, CEH was not in the top 5 running backs. He was not somebody who you were like, this is where he is from a talent perspective. But you look at what Gibbs was able to do in the last 2 years, 78 of his 93 targets for 848 yards and 5 scores with 28 broken tackles in that. Like, he is an open field disaster. Like, you get him out there, he's going to be a mismatch for anyone.
And the speed as well, right? The thing you have to come back to on CEH, people forget this. He ran like a 4.6 40. Right. What we're talking about for Jahmyr Gibbs is possibly a sub 4.3 40. He has that kind of explosion in space that Andy Reid has always been really perhaps the best coach in the NFL in terms of getting your players in space, getting the kind of plays drawn up to take advantage of that. Look what he even did with McKinnon. Yeah. All those big plays. He designs his offense to allow for that. Of course, didn't have Tyreek Hill this year, so maybe they actually do go get a major playmaker like Gibbs that Andy Reid and Mahomes are going to be able to feed into that kind of scheme and take, I just imagine big play after big play after big play with Gibbs in that offense. Now, Kansas City is a little bit interesting, right? They throw a ton inside the 5, and people will talk about, well, that's going to hurt because Gibbs may not get a lot of that. Careful there, right? Okay, maybe he's not going to be viewed as a goal line back. Bama didn't even necessarily use him as a goal line back, but I think that Gibbs is going to get his. And again, it's very creative offense down there near the goal line. And so you could absolutely see them scheming in Jahmyr Gibbs in various different ways to score the ball. So I actually think that we're okay. And again, he's a yak god. He's going to take it and run with it in that kind of offense. You can't key on him because you got to worry about Kelsey. You got to worry about Mahomes. You got to worry about everything else, right? So
McKinnon's a free agent, and I'm glad you brought him up because just imagine a 8-year younger, more electric Jerick McKinnon. I mean, and Jerick McKinnon down the stretch from weeks 13 on, scored at least a touchdown in every game. He was winning you fantasy championships.
Yeah.
He was. He finished the season as at the RB20, but we're looking at down the stretch from 14 on was 33, 36, 14, 23. I mean, that's what gets you excited about Jahmyr Gibbs. McKinnon's likely going to move on if they would draft a guy like Gibbs. Pacheco would still have a role. But this is why we're talking about moving off a guy like Pacheco, moving off Clyde Edwards-Helaire before this happens, because we know, that organization is not thrilled with the running back position. You can't just assume that because they drafted a guy several years ago that it's going to be the same situation. You can't assume that we're not going to be replaced, because how many times have we done that? With the Zach Stacy, they go get Todd Gurley, and there are all these different situations where a guy has a nice year and then they move on to the next one. So I think that 4-5 Gibbs. Now, John, the difference maker there for me, and I keep hearing Keenan Allen is a potential casualty cut there for the cap space. If JSN would go to the Chargers,
okay.
that instantly moves him back there. I keep teetering back and forth, and a lot's going to have to do with landing spot, but I'm not ready to move anyone else in that tier 3 yet. Those two guys are just neck and neck, and I toy back and forth with it every single day. I'm just kind of going back and forth.
Yeah, me too. And I'm staying super fluid, and even from day to day, I'll watch a little bit more film. I'll listen to an analyst, and what I've kind of determined, if I had to come back to this comparison one more time, now that we've broken down Gibbs, you look at ceiling here. You want to get an early rookie pick that's going to give you a really solid ceiling. I think Gibbs absolutely gives you that in this scenario with JSN to the Patriots, more so. Now, JSN needs to end up in an offense that really features the slot.
I agree.
I loved your example about the Chargers, because I really that's kind of what I'm concluding is JSN is not going to be mixed in outside much, really at all. He doesn't really have that true alpha or take the top off the defense type speed. Now, he's about the best route runner you could expect. He's going to eat in the slot, but we got to see him go somewhere we know that he's going to just get absolutely peppered with targets in that role. And in this case, I'm not quite as excited in terms of a ceiling than I would be with Gibbs.
My RB3, and I know it slightly differs from yours, a guy that I think can be a bell cow, an early day 2 pick like he is here. Garrett has Zach Charbonnet going in at 312 to the Atlanta Falcons. For me, there's no physical or special skill that you see with Charbonnet, but the guy can do it all, right? He's 6'1", 220 pounds, athletic tools, but nothing's like elite, like we're talking about with Bijan and JSN, not JSN, but Gibbs. Like, he's not going to wow you as much as there. I see a lot of James Conner in his game, but he's a good pass catcher, 37 catches, 320 yards. Fantastic, in between the tackles, 1,358 yards rushing this year. Now, here's where we get to an interesting spot, right? A lot of people are saying, I think Atlanta's a great landing spot. For me, I've been saying sell Tyler Algier. I think that's a spot where, he had a great year. He had 1,000 yards, so he still carries that maybe 23-second range value. But Atlanta might be looking for a guy here. Do these guys complement each other? Is this a good landing spot? I think that's the biggest thing. Because Charbonnet, and I know you have Evans at 3, and we're going to talk about him in a little bit. Charbonnet is my 3, and I know we're in similar areas. Let's talk a little bit about that Atlanta landing spot, right? Because we're going to be looking at a new quarterback. We're going to be looking at a new scenario here. How does this shake out for you?
Yeah, and in this mock too, I think it's important to point out that Atlanta did not take another quarterback. So we're still looking at a similar offense. I think it's interesting for Charbonnet here, because Atlanta clearly wants to run the ball. If you look at the run rate for a good portion of the season, they were number 1 overall in terms of running the ball. So I would consider selling Algier. I think that with Cordarrelle Patterson kind of getting up there in age and kind of wearing down as the season goes on, if Atlanta does want to commit with Arthur Smith to keep committing to the run there, and we have a quarterback that's probably going to be more of a more game manager, right? I don't see these guys airing it, even if it's Ritter, kind of airing it out. So I think Algier's a sell, and I think that we could look at a committee, but you're running the ball so much here that you could see Charbonnet kind of in a 1A, mixing in Algier, maybe Patterson here and there, and there's enough volume overall that it's actually a decent landing spot. I don't think it blows either of us away where we're like, yes, perfect.
My biggest thing is aside from Robinson, and I think Gibbs is even going to go in and he's going to be a 1A to someone's 1B. You know what I mean? I think Charbonnet, there's no one that's going to go in there and just blow. Like Charbonnet is good, but there are very few situations, aside from maybe Carolina or some areas, where he doesn't go in and dominate touches. I think, he starts out at least as that 1A, 1B, would kind of take over, a little bit more as the season goes on. And I think that's what you have to understand about Algier, what you have to understand about Pacheco is if those deals, if these guys do, and even in, we're going to talk about Buffalo a little bit. Same with James Cook. We're going to have, there's definitely going to be some competition coming in. The next one really kind of shocked me, and I liked it. Is we have Roschon Johnson going to the Chargers. I think the Chargers are like a sneaky play. I mean, like we wanted Spiller to be that guy. The amount of touches for Spiller this year just was upsetting, right? Like we were trying to get so many other guys in there on the floor. I think if not for Bijan Robinson, Johnson would be a little bit more of a household name. I mean, he's a power back. Yep. He could be a number one in a lot of different situations. 6'2" guy. He has a knack for
size.
What's that?
Yeah, he's got the size. The guy he's ripped. Actually, dude is a unit.
Right, at highest broken tackle rate in the country, 85 broken tackles on just 189 attempts. I mean, this is a guy that I think we're kind of sleeping on a little bit, John, is a lot of people have him as a late second. If he gets a second-round draft capital here and he gets in a situation where he is given the opportunity, if Eckler goes down, Eckler's going to be a little bit older in age, this is a pretty nice landing spot here where I kind of like it a little bit more as I thought about it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I've been a big fan. And I'm kind of have to tell you, I'm laughing at the analytics community that are looking at kind of his stats on a per game basis versus some of the other running backs. I'm like, get out of here with that, right?
Yeah, come on.
Like, look, and he's going to give you the ability to run between the tackles. He will actually stay on the field a lot on third downs, great pass protection, really tough guy that you could see them giving a workload to. And frankly, I think that the Chargers could use someone like that. They were starting to struggle a bit because they weren't really able to establish the run. Now, I know what they've done with Eckler, but we all know as well that most of Eckler's production does come via the passing game and just continuing to feed him. I mean, he had so many targets and receptions. He's like 100 receptions a year type guy to land a top 5 type deal. But you're going to a really great offense. You get second round draft capital. I already have Roschon Johnson in my late second. I have been kind of creeping him up. He was very impressive at the Senior Bowl. He did end up breaking his hand. I heard that they actually had to tell him, listen, Roschon, sorry, but we're not going to let you keep practicing at the Senior Bowl. Like the guy wanted to keep playing with a broken hand just to show out. Like, so yeah, he's tough, and he's gonna be a guy creeping up boards if he does land draft capital like this on a high-powered offense.
I got him at 210. I got him at 210 right now, and I'm kind of excited.
Yeah, that's about right.
With seeing here, we start to check the boxes. We watch the film. We start to, look at some of the things. Soon we're going to have the combine, so we can start checking those off. And this is a nice exercise because Garrett's given us a heads up on another thing is draft capital. And if he would go in the second round, you can't deny that. I mean, that's something where he is someone that's they're fully committed to, and I would be excited to kind of add him. The next guy, just Twitter's going to be just amped about. But at 2.30, we're looking at the Bills taking Tank Bigsby. And I think Tank Bigsby going to the Bills is going to catapult him up draft boards. It's going to move him up into that, some people are going to try to move him up into that same area as Gibbs and JSN. But I mean, he's got that LaShawn McCoy-esque lateral burst. I mean, I love watching him play. He was behind the worst, like the third lowest graded run blocking offense. Yeah, it was so bad, but he still earned, 90.4 rushing grades. That was one of the highest there. 60 broken tackles, 10 scores behind a brutal offensive line. And I think Buffalo is in a weird situation, John, where Josh Allen, I believe, has really covered up a lot of the warts of that offense.
Yeah, no question.
Like Singletary, we talked about him, on our running back show a couple of weeks ago. And I think Tank Bigsby would give them that. I don't think James Cook gets completely removed. He's still that third down, change of pace back. But I think Bigsby jumps in that day or RB situation where he is that first and second down type guy, and I think that would move him way up draft boards. Like whoever goes to Buffalo, people are going to get excited about.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that this is a situation with the landing spot where people might actually end up overreacting to it. And I saw
Agreed.
a few people kind of jump in the thread and kind of like, hey, be careful with how much you would bring up Tank Bigsby. But I've already got Tank Bigsby kind of in a similar tier as Charbonnet, well, we didn't see Kendre Miller here, but with Kendre Miller and with Sean Tucker. And so I kind of have them similar. I have them at the bottom of that tier, but the talent is absolutely there with Tank Bigsby. I think that, would Buffalo really commit to running the ball a bit more? I think that they probably need to. I mean, we saw what happened with Josh Allen with the elbow injury, and that kind of ended up hampering that offense down the stretch. They need to keep Josh Allen healthy. They need somebody that can count on. And frankly, they really do need another weapon in that offense to keep it balanced. So Tank Bigsby would probably, I would guess, be the 1A. I would be a little concerned, number one, with James Cook still being there and getting a lot of the passing down work, which could lower the ceiling of Tank Bigsby, and just how much the Bills really run the ball at the goal line in the red zone. I think Singletary had five rushing touchdowns, not super exciting. But so I think in general, I love Tank Bigsby in Buffalo, very excited about it, but I'm just kind of talking to myself through this process, like try not to overreact too much here.
Yeah.
But I think he would end up consistently going in the first round of rookie drafts in that situation with that draft capital.
Yeah, and the nice part is, and we did that podcast a couple weeks ago in these 23 seconds, and I think they just keep getting better and better, right? Because some of these running backs are going to move up based on their landing spot. They're going to move some of those A's. I had Tank Bigsby, I believe, at 204. We were in that area. If he goes to Buffalo, I feel like he firmly moves up into that 110 to 112 area based on your. Right. And we always say draft based off of talent, not need. But that's going to give you an area where maybe Boutte falls into the second round. We're already starting to see Josh Downs fall into that early second round. And that early second, that 201 to 205 is getting juicier by the day. I'm doing this thing right now where I'm trying to, we talked about it, where I'm trying to package veterans like a Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If I take like 210 and Clyde Edwards-Helaire and try to move up to 204, I know that seems like nothing, but that 201 to 205 range is just juicy. Like I'm excited to be in that range with all my picks. And this year, and we talked about it, the best way to do your punts, to do your rebuilds is to get that 101. And this year you're getting that 201, which is like an extra first round pick. Like it is that good. So that's something we've been really advocating. And another guy's going to go in that area. He went in the third round in this particular mock. And this is, and then I want to talk about the tier here because we kind of have these guys in a similar area, is Zach Evans to the Bears. Now I kind of like the Bears landing spot for a couple different reasons. I know everybody's out there saying go buy Khalil Herbert, and I loved Khalil Herbert. But I think we're in a situation where they got so much money. They are either going to bring someone in on a contract, one of these, high profile running backs, or they're going to draft someone like Zach Evans. And I think Zach Evans is a much better running back than Khalil Herbert. Zach Evans would come in and be that primary ball carrier there for an offense that Montgomery's stats fell as Fields started to progress, so there is a little bit of worry there. Whoever goes to Chicago, just like you said with Philadelphia, they're going to lose some rushing touchdowns. They're going to lose some areas in there. But I think Zach Evans, this would at least give him an opportunity to start and I think really shine in the NFL because he's someone that I have in this same tier here of after this draft. And I want you to, first we'll talk a little bit about Evans, but in this tier right now, I think we would be moving Evans, Bigsby, Charbonnet, all would move into that tier 3, and really it would be a good debate.
Yeah, I in this scenario with Garrett Price's mock, I am so high on Zach Evans, I would very much consider keeping him as my RB3 overall. Yeah. And I do kind of like this landing spot in Chicago. I mean, if you just kind of break this down, I think that the fear of Justin Fields taking away into zone rushing hurt, is real, and it would hurt to some degree. But here's the thing: you got defenses that are going to be constantly keying in on Justin Field and trying to contain him. That takes the attention off the running back. David Montgomery actually had 10 touchdowns overall.
Yep.
5 on the ground, 5 receiving. Khalil Herbert had another 4 rushing touchdowns. So, look, I mean, that offense will continue to improve, I believe, with Justin Fields continuing to mature, and using a talent like Zach Evans with that kind of draft capital would be pretty sexy, I think. So I wouldn't overreact too much there. And again, like just from a yardage perspective, Montgomery had over 1,100 yards this past season. So there's plenty to be had in that offense. And again, you can't just key in and stack the box on the running back when you got Justin Fields as a quarterback. So it kind of balances things out a bit there.
Talent-wise, Evans, Bigsby, or Charbonnet?
I have Evans talent-wise as a step above those guys right now. And again, why? I really think that he has the most well-rounded skill set, his ability to run inside. He does have the size. He can absolutely mix it in space. He can receive the ball. He was the most efficient running back in the entire class. Every touch that he did get was really impressive. I had knocked him for the longest time on his losing work to Judkins there at Ole Miss. And I kind of get that, but when you watch him on film and you actually look at what he did with the touches he had, very, very impressive guy. And he's been doing it since high school when he was one of the top rated number 5 recruits coming out of high school, basically right up there with Bijan in that recruiting class. And so people are like, small sample size, you just haven't seen it long enough. I disagree. He's been doing it for a long time now, and we've seen enough to me from a talent perspective to put him just a notch above those other two.
Yeah, and I have him and Charbonnet both above Bigsby. Charbonnet is that great contact balance. 4.15 yards after contact this year. Like, that's insane. He looked great. Now here's the tricky part, John, is now let's talk about the landing spots. Chicago, Buffalo, Atlanta. What is the most prime landing spot out of the 3 for you?
Well, certainly Buffalo is going to be the best overall offense and best overall opportunity.
But here's the question: is that going to be a trap, right? Because do they move into that area, or is one of these other offenses feel like there could be a higher ceiling for that guy's fantasy production?
That's kind of what I'm thinking here too, because if you look at kind of just the overall production that you expect, the least competition is going to be Chicago, right? Because we just talked about in Atlanta, Algier did have a pretty good season. Patterson is still there. And with the Bills, we know James Cook's still going to be there, possibly others that they could go grab. And, and Khalil Herbert, I think, is for sure more of the 1B. And when you bring in a talent like Evans, that landing spot from a floor and overall volume production perspective, I think it's really just about as solid as the other two. But these are the kinds of things that it's important to start talking about this stuff now. Like, I'd love to hear from the community what you all think about this, so I can kind of process these landing spots a bit more too. But again, my off-season process is really to get these guys in tiers from a talent perspective, and then you're moving them around within those tiers based on draft capital and landing spots. So there wasn't a huge amount of movement for me because I already had Zach Evans a little higher. There wasn't another landing spot for me in this particular scenario with Garrett Price's mock that caused me to change that versus what I had it pre-landing spot based on talent, if that makes sense. So
those other scenarios are coming up now in the 3rd round.
Okay, here we go.
Sean Tucker to the Bengals, Tajay Spears to the Dolphins. That is my number 1 landing spot. And then even then we have Devin Achane going to Arizona. So let's start to unpack this a little bit. I mean, Tucker lands in a fantastic offense that who knows what the situation is with Mixon now. I like that a lot. I might be even willing to bump him up into that, the tier above. Tajay Spears, after an amazing season, goes out, flashes at the Senior Bowl. And could you imagine his speed mixed with McDaniel's play calling? Like, that's one that just makes me drool, where he's going to be jumping way up. And then, I've been lower than consensus on A-Chain just because of the size. But if you we'd be looking at a guy that the draft capital, if he goes in that 3rd round, the tape is unbelievable. Like, I watch him and the way he cuts and his speed, like, this guy is unbelievable, but 185 pounds just scares the crap out of me. So in that situation, maybe he goes there and he's the third down change of pace guy to James Conner. Spears is the guy that's still going to work in, but Miami has some older running backs. So, I mean, that's another exciting one. Let's unpack this just a little bit, because I know we want to move into comparing him into the 22s and 23s. But out of this scenario, talk to me quick on Tucker going to Cincinnati, Spears going to Miami, and Achane going to the Cardinals.
This would be a lot of fun.
Right, this is where we wish some of the, like, if you told me Evans went to Miami, like, I would jump him way up there. Like, I would even start to have him starting to creep into that tier 3 with Gibbs, and with JSN, just because that would be like the ideal situation in my estimation.
Yeah, I agree. I think Miami, you could make the argument in the Mike McDaniel offense there in Miami that is predicated on speed and using the running backs in the way that they have would be a really fun scenario. I think that again, very savvy dynasty community that would quickly pick up on that. The Spears hype would get out of control with this kind of draft capital and that landing spot, because again, the speed is on display and very much utilized there. I would almost get, I have to tell you, a little bit concerned about the situation for him, his ability to stay healthy. Now he has added weight, and at the Senior Bowl, he weighed in at like 204, had put on 7 to 10 pounds, and he didn't lose any of the speed and burst. So the ceiling here would be so fun. But remember, he did have an ACL injury. He looks like he's fully recovered, but there's some history there. You would kind of worry a little bit. So this is kind of like a risk-reward scenario. But you and I, we play Dynasty to win. We like taking a little bit of risk. The reward on Spears could get him very much into that early second range. And I think we might see people taking shots in the late first.
Yeah.
But just the overall profile, I might hesitate to put him
I'm not
there,
doing
but,
it.
I'm not quite there, like that kind of hype.
Yeah.
There's so many other polished players there. Yeah.
Let's start to combine them with the 2022s, because you know how I take the information that I get and I try to make it applicable to what we just saw. We just saw rookies, and we want to see where they're at in that situation. And a lot of people were saying, well, let's move Spears up to like 5 overall out of that list. And it's like, whoa, pump the brakes a little bit. We're getting excited. So let's talk a little bit about tier 1 for me. We don't need to get into a lot. It's Bijan and Breece. And a lot of people I'm like are getting. I can't hear a lot of people in the community be like, I'm not sure about, what should do with Breece Hall. I mean, listen, 5.8 yards per carry, 80 carries for 463 yards. His 5.8 was almost a full yard above anyone else in this rookie class. He's got 19 catches, 11.5 yards per reception. I saw what I needed to from Breece Hall to have him be my RB2 overall. I'm not debating that anymore. I feel like these two guys, with their age, with their upside, have separated themselves. But let's start talking about the next tier down, right? The next tier down, Walker. I sometimes I put him up into tier 1, sometimes I don't quite, but then I have him and Gibbs in that tier 2. So if you're out there right now and someone comes to you, John, and they're like, I want to get Gibbs at 104, how much more, how close do you have Walker and Gibbs?
I have them very similarly. The thing I would tell you is Walker is going to be a safer floor scenario. He's going to have more overall production. And look, I mean, in his rookie year, they fed him once he was established there as the guy. He was getting such consistent production that it's understandable to put him in that same tier as Gibbs. But Gibbs, we just talked about it. He's the ceiling play, and in the Chiefs offense, I think you would consider him in that same tier. He's going to have more big plays. He'll be more active in the receiving game than Walker would be. But I really like them both. These are going to be two very fun rookies that are going to change the landscape in the NFL. They're just very different type players in how they get their production.
I think Walker's special. I mean, like from what I was watching, and the more, even just after talking about it, I feel like because we look at it, and you got to look at so many different things right now. You're looking at where Walker's draft value is, and he's going that late second, but the 104 is going somewhere mid third, or even later sometimes. I think I think Walker there's the excitement of that rookie pick, but I think Walker is, like you said, that safer floor. He co-led and evaded tackles with 68 this year, just showcased rare speed, patience, elusiveness. Like I'm trying to buy him. It's too late in those situations, so we want to assess who the next guys are. The next tier below that, and this is where it gets a little bit fun. We already discussed it a little bit, but out of the two classes, my RB5 would be Evans. My RB6 would be Bigsby, and my RB7 would be Charbonnet. And I think what I keep telling everybody is tiers above rankings. We're in a very early stage of this, and I had someone just flip out on me because I had Bigsby above Charbonnet, and I'm like, it's because of the landing spot. If you look at all my previous work, I think the talent's a little bit different. But this is a fun area here where can you see any of these guys jumping up into that same area as Gibbs? We talked about it a little bit. Like, I think the value of all of these guys, Evans right now is going in that 107 to 110 range. Bigsby, before the Buffalo landing spot, we're talking early second. Charbonnet was a late first. Don't overreact to these landing spots, but don't underreact.
Yeah, all such good advice. I want to reinforce this. That is absolutely our process. Is you're putting them in tiers right now. You're taking in information. You're staying very fluid. There's a reason why I kind of keep tweaking, because like I hadn't seen that or I hadn't heard that, and I overlooked that. And you kind of stay humble and keep taking inputs here. Now, for me, the guy.
That's why we do this in February, right? I saw one analyst said, "I can't believe some jokers out there in the community are starting to talk rookies already." I'm like, starting to, dude. We've been doing this since January 1st, and we're putting you. Party, we are putting you in a position where you, like John said, you can add a little bit, right? Like you don't want to show up to the test without any kind of studying. You don't want to just show up on draft day without all these different things. And we're gonna look at the combine. We're gonna look at what we're doing now with all these different processes. Then the NFL draft is gonna come, and we're gonna have you in position where you are gonna be able to make the most educated decision. And I think that's what all these different exercises we're running through is to make you see the landing spots, make you see the draft capital, all these things that matter. So, I didn't mean to cut you off with that. I just, I read that the other day and I got so floored because he's like, guys, just show up, late May and we'll figure this thing out. And I'm like, man.
No, we should be talking about
too casual.
Now what these landing spots and what this draft capital will do to influence our final tiers and eventually rankings, right? We have to input the combine next, right? And even before we get to the draft, things will stay fluid. I think to come back to your question, the guy that I still think could potentially end up in that top tier for me still is Zach Evans. But right now, based on everything that I'm taking in and hearing, the draft capital may or may not be there. But if he gets round 2 draft capital, that probably would be enough for me to consider him there, but I got to see the landing spot as well. There's a lot that we'd have to consider. How well does he do at the combine? I think he's got the most overall potential out of this. But I think we keep coming back to there's got to be some really compelling draft capital and landing spots for me to change up my rankings and tiers dramatically, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing we're trying to say here is we're going through all this. So that we don't.
As long as we see a second or third round draft capital, right? Because historically speaking,
that's right.
Fourth rounders can hit. We've had Aaron Jones. We've had guys like that. We've had guys that have hit. But like fourth rounders historically, it's that second and third rounder where most of your purebred running backs, those guys. And you're going to have contributors that show up in the fourth round, even contributors that show up in the fifth round. But right now we're talking about running backs where Charbonnet looks like he's consistently getting mocked in that second round, and Bigsby and Evans in that some mocks are second, some mocks are third. I've seen Evans have the biggest swing out of the three. It almost seems like Charbonnet is it seems like almost every draft he's going there. Occasionally a guy will have Evans up above. Occasionally they'll have Evans way below. So he's that dark horse there where he's going to be one way or another and really change the way things look.
And here's another thing we should talk about for a minute. Coming back to those guys that you rattled off before we kind of broke it down there was, for one example was Sean Tucker to Cincinnati. And we also talked about someone going to the Chargers. And what I think will happen here is the dynasty community will overreact to them being behind an already established starter,
right,
like a Joe Mixon. Those are opportunities that you can take advantage of, right? Because we have an aging running back in Joe Mixon with a potential step function increase in his contract.
Right. I think anyone in that
offense.
2017 class, the Cook, the Kamara, anybody there who
fill in the blank, right?
mentally were like, those guys are studs. I don't want a guy behind him, but I think
it's a huge discount.
Exactly.
I mean, I would love Sean Tucker in that scenario, and I don't know if that surprises you all, but that's why we do these pods. I would love that situation because I think it would be pretty clear that they would move on from Mixon. You have perhaps a top 5 offense with respect to just putting up fantasy points. Mixon, even in a kind of poor efficiency year, still dropped crazy production in that offense throughout the year. Lots of touchdowns, worked him into the passing game. So
he started to. I mean, if you look at it fantasy wise, and you just look at the numbers, you're like, okay. But then you look, and he had that 50+ point game there where he blew up, and the production on Mixon and the production on Dalvin Cook did start to drop a little bit. And those were guys where we get someone in there, you get somebody in behind, even James Conner, like we're talking about with A-Chain. You want to look at those kind of things. 2 guys that were saved by Garrett's mock. And I got a lot of criticism about where I had them. It was out of the 2 classes, my RB8, Rachaad White, and my RB9, Dameon Pierce. So what you have to look at is a couple of things. One, the Bucs have already said that they're toying with the idea of rebuilding, right? We're like, let's see what happens. And Rachaad White has the PPR chops, 50 of 58, 50 catches on 58 targets. He showed that he could be, one of those. I mean, the fact that he wasn't even starting in the beginning and then just got a couple different opportunities. This is a guy that's screaming RB1 if Leonard Fournette leaves. And I'm going out there and I'm making offers right now because you can have him for a 23-second. And I think that would be an ideal situation where he's able to, they'll probably bring someone else in there. But I think Rachaad White has RB1 potential with his PPR chops, and I think that's someone that excites me a little bit. I'm not saying pay any don't pay a first. Don't pay any first at all. But if you can get him in a second round, in that 203, 204, 205 range, I think it's a worthwhile buy. And then the other guy that John, I get so much flack whenever I endorse him. But I mean, Dameon Pierce. So in this particular I know I was crapping on Dameon Pierce when people were paying 23 first for him because that was just stupid. But now, I mean, you got to look at what's going on, right? So in this particular mock, Houston doesn't take a running back. DeMeco Ryans comes in from that Shanahan tree, likely going to hire an offensive coordinator who prefers a run-heavy scheme, just like Shanahan. And I think Pierce, he's a guy that's going to be in that 1,000-yard type area. I mean, he averaged 4.3 yards per carry. That checks the box. 220 attempts for 939, 4 touchdowns, broke 35 tackles. I think if you can go out there, and I would not buy Dameon Pierce until after the draft day, and I know that's the tricky part, right? Like, so if you wait, you're not going to get him at that price. But if you could get him right now, I saw a guy trade the 206 for him. And I think I think that's good value there. Potentially, but if they draft someone, that changes everything. I think both of these scenarios are teams that are rebuilding that should focus in other areas that I think you could see Rachaad White and Dameon Pierce both being starting running backs in 2023, and you're buying them at a discount.
Well, I think that's the thing. And, for the longest time, people were kind of reacting to Dameon Pierce getting overvalued. But at this point, it sounds like he is kind of appropriately rated, right? He was a 4th round draft pick. I think he went 107th overall. And so, some of the community remembers that and, kind of knock him for going a little bit later. But that, again, 4th round is not a death sentence. And in this situation, no one else was drafted. And what else did we do? Well, we got Bryce Young in there. And Garrett also had Quentin Johnston going to the Texans. So all of a sudden that offense is on the rise. Who else is going to be taking carries for the Texans? Nobody on the roster right now. With Rex Burkhead? Yeah. So I could see a nice volume situation in an improved offense with an improved coaching staff. Really love DeMeco Ryans. That had to be my favorite coaching move so far this offseason. Really love that. Brings in some toughness. You could see them really trying to establish the run, and as Bryce Young starts to establish himself in that offense. So I actually agree with you. Dameon Pierce would be on the rise for me. Now, do you make the move now for a 206? I probably would.
Yeah, I'm not paying a first. I would pay
no
204 or later without and try to sell it on the risk. Be like, I don't know if he's gonna necessarily be the guy, or try to disguise it in a deal somewhere. The next tier is interesting, right? So the next tier, 10 through 12, we're looking at Sean Tucker going to Cincinnati, Brian Robinson, who in this particular mock, again, the Commanders did not take a running back, so I had him in that same area, and Tajay Spears. So Spears and Tucker obviously are the new, more exciting names. Those are the guys that are going to get that draft capital. Those are the guys that we're going to be kind of jumping into that area. But Brian Robinson, I mean, him running out to many men by 50 Cent, still
incredible.
Just a bit,
yeah, chills.
205 carries for 797 yards. I understand he managed just 3.9 yards per carry. It wasn't exciting there, but I think you still have to. I'm not paying a second for him right now, and I think that's the tricky part. I put him there just based off this particular mock, but I think Tucker, firmly going to Cincinnati is that early second. Spears moves himself into the mid-second. Robinson's probably number 12 out of that group now that I look at it a little bit closer, just because of where they're at in those situations. But again, we talked about Tucker. We talked about Spears. We all want Antonio Gibson to get the ball a little bit more because you and I both love him, but we're going to have to wait till the next contract. The tricky part is the hardest person for me to really lock down, the two hardest people, and I have them at 12 and 13, or 13 and 14 here is Cook, 13, 14, 15. Cook, and then I have Algier, and then I have Pacheco. And it's like, what happens to their roles? And I think this is a constantly moving type thing that we're because I think Cook maintains a bigger role. Algier had the best season out of the three, but we're looking at if Charbonnet comes there, that's the highest draft capital. There's so much we have to unpack when we're talking about a mid-level running back, right? We talk about so many times you hear dynasty nerds and other people say running backs have a 2 to 3 year window. That is literally the definition of your Brian Robinsons, your Pachecos, your Algiers, your those guys that get drafted a little bit later have 2 or 3 years in the league. Cook seems like someone who's going to have that PPR chops to last a little bit longer, but might have the lowest value out of those three. So let's talk a little bit about those three guys.
Well, again, I think your point is dead on, that a team is definitely going to look at the investment that they made. That's one of the reasons that draft capital matters so much, because just like anybody that invests in something, you want to get the ROI out of that. If you didn't really invest as much, they didn't have the price tag for the organization, they're less likely to, there's some offenses that are different, guys that really truly don't care about draft capital. But I think that's the concern with all the guys you rattled off there, that they're not quite as an investment for the organization. But I do think, James Cook for me does stick out as being probably the most valuable of those guys. And he could get drafted over, but he has enough talent and he showcased it. He was taking more and more touches away from Singletary down the stretch. He's still in a really strong offense. There's risk with all these guys, though, because of what we've been talking about for the past few pods, because of this free agent and rookie running back class. So I don't think we're advocating going out to really go after any of these guys, but like everything else, at the right value, it might be worth considering.
I think James Cook is the only one that I would actively buy out of the three.
I think so too. I think I'm talking myself into that.
If you look at things, 507 yards, 2 touchdowns, 5.7 yards per carry was surprising when I started to look at things. 11 15-plus yard runs was second among all rookies, 21 receptions. And I think we started to see maybe there's a scenario, John, where James Cook becomes Devin Singletary, and then they take they take a guy like Roschon Johnson, or they take another bigger running back somewhere. This is something that we're going to have to look at throughout, see what Buffalo really thinks they have in James Cook.
They'll have,
because if they take a guy in the second, that really tells me what they think of James Cook. If they take a guy in a third, we'll see if it's in 1A, 1B. If they wait till the fourth, then James Cook goes from a guy that's like, okay, an afterthought, to he puts himself into a situation where he's going to increase in value. Algier is different to me. I thought he played fantastic. I really did. It was a surprise for me that he was up over 1,000 yards, 0 fumbles, 16 receptions, and he just kind of slowly, steadily did his thing. I think he takes him and Pacheco, based off their skill set, takes the biggest knock if someone goes there. And again, it's all about draft capital. If Algiers there and they take A-Chain or they take one of these running backs, or maybe even Spears goes to the Falcons, okay, Algiers still going to maintain maybe some of that early down work. But if they draft a guy in the second, the third round, he really drops off quite a bit. And I think
right. And one of the reasons we were so surprised by Algiers' performance is because he went in the 5th round of the NFL draft. And that's where just the numbers tell you you're not going to see as much success there again, not as much of an investment in him. So if the Falcons and Arthur Smith want to get another playmaker in there and we see an early pick like we did in this case, there's more risk for Algier because of his later draft capital is what we're saying.
And I think what I do with these guys, and what I do with Algier, what I do with Pacheco, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, maybe even Khalil Herbert, these guys that are in a situation where they could lose value, right? We always talk about trying to insulate that value, trying to take away an opportunity to make that worth more. So if I could trade Algier and a 24 second for a 24 first for a non-savvy, owner who might be know your league, maybe a Falcons fan, maybe a guy who really was big on what he did and you played in a redraft league with him, or try to move some things around, maybe put Pacheco in a third to move yourself up to 203, 204. Take these guys, treat them as capital. Because if I have to start Isaiah Pacheco or Algier, or Brian Robinson next year, I'm not in a position to win. Like, that's just how I look at it. Those type of players are guys that I don't own very often. I draft them in the 3rd round, the 4th round, the 5th round. I draft them in my rookie picks as those guys that I'm just taking a shot on. And guess what? Most times they don't continuously pan out. The amount of times that we get that guy who was taken in the 5th round and then they produce 2, 3, 4 years in a row, it's a handful of guys. It's next to nothing. So if you can play the odds and start moving yourself up, maybe get yourself from 212 to 206. Maybe Algiers helped you win a championship, but you can package and move around and get yourself up, move up in the draft, get yourself in to get some of these guys. Because John and I have really been advocating for this 2nd round, John. I mean, like,
big time.
This is where things go. Who's the biggest riser based off of this particular thing? I don't want to say Kendre Miller's the biggest loser out of this group. You and I love him. Garrett didn't have him drafted in the first 3 rounds.
About that one.
I know. I wanted to text him right away and be what happened there?
Talk through. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But who's the biggest riser out of this group for you? And then who would be the biggest dropper or faller out of just this exercise?
Yeah, I mean, specifically with the running backs, I think that it's Tyjae Spears because he gets 3rd round draft capital and he goes to Miami. And for all the reasons we said earlier, the hype would be out of control. Now, I think we said, hey, let's take a measured approach to this. But I think he would be the biggest riser for me and probably an even bigger riser in the overall community. And I think that Jahmyr Gibbs, too, jumps potentially a tier. Tank Bigsby going to Buffalo, I think,
huge,
would really help himself a lot there. And then Roschon Johnson. And I don't think that he would be available any longer in this scenario, certainly not in the 3rd, maybe not in the late 2nd. He's going to be creeping more into the mid-2nd range if you go early 2nd round to the Chargers. So I think those are the biggest risers. The fallers, for sure, we didn't see Kendre Miller go, which is a bit of a surprise for me. A-Chain has been kind of rumored to be going early day 2, and he kind of went more in the 3rd, which is kind of what I would expect. And I think you and I have had some concerns on his size, so this would maybe potentially hurt him. But those are some of the guys that I would have to knock a bit on my board in this particular mock.
My biggest riser would be Bijan. No, you can't go up anymore. Like everyone's like, hey, is there a situation where he moves up for you? I have heard people taking him as early as 108, and there are 8 stud quarterbacks where that would just scare me. Like, you can't go and take Bijan up above, Fields or some of these other guys or Joe Burrow. Like, you're going to burn yourself, And but for me, my biggest takeaway out of this thing is I'm starting to put things together is that I'm starting to like Kenneth Walker more and ready to put him into that tier 1. I'm starting to go make some offers for Pearson White, not overpaying, but if I can go and I'm a win now team and I can add one of those guys instead of, an uncertain pick at 205, 206, 207. I'm just kicking the tires, like this is part of that process. And for me, I mean, obviously you covered the rookies real well. I'm trying to sell Robinson. I'm trying to sell Pacheco. I'm trying to sell Algiers. I like the players. I don't love the players. I think we get off the profiles and we start to sell them. Biggest rookie riser though, like I got to love as a Bills and an Eagles guy, Bijan coming to either of them or even Bigsby. I mean, like these
It'd
running backs.
Incredible. Yeah.
And John, we keep talking about this every show and we got like a couple more minutes here. Everyone keeps saying this class, like they went from it being fantastic to they're okay. They're mediocre now. And people are starting to talk about 24 ones already, like they're giving up on this class. And I know Dynasty's cyclical. We talk about it all the time, but like, stop. Just stop. Let's just appreciate that this class, 1 through 5, is ridiculous. And then it's like 6 through 16 are going to be firm contributors to your dynasty team. Yeah. And the 24 class is exciting, and we know, the 101 next year might be worth more than the 101 this year or pretty similar, but it's like, let's not push out. I have so many guys saying, hey, I got the 107 and I don't like anything in there. And I'm hearing someone wrote something negative on Jordan Addison. Someone wrote something negative on Quentin Johnson. Early part of this process, John and I like to tell you the good things about these guys, right? We start getting analysts in and we start breaking things down, but it's like, let's not sell 107, 108. Let's not start selling these picks like these players aren't going to hit.
Yeah, it's such good advice. Hang in there. There's a reason why I've been talking about these guys for so long. The early second of this class, in my mind, is worth what a 22 late first is worth. Think about it that way. And an early first is worth well more than a 22 first. And for sure, just the value of these picks now versus 24 this whole season that you have coming up. You have to value versus waiting another year. So don't give up on this class right now just because you hear analysts that are critiquing it. That's what we do. We're not just watching the highlights anymore. We're really breaking down film. We're really looking at their profiles, and we do critique them. That's all part of the process, though. Hang in. Again, the value of these 23 picks will continue to rise as we approach these rookie drafts. Can't wait.
And we're still on Bijan watch. I got to say the most ridiculous trade that I've seen so far this week was Garrett Wilson in the 103 for the 101. And I'm like, if you are using Garrett Wilson as a as a way to move up 2 picks, like just stop. Just stop. Like if you have that 101, you can float it out there. Don't trade it yet. But if you get a trade like that, where someone's going to give you elite wide receiver 1 to move up 2 spots, you go for it. So thanks again for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the process.